Good morning, everyone. This is Generic Fool's Test. I am, going to just do a Warhammer 40k lore drop so that, when I play Space Marine, people aren't going to just get lost and go, oh my god, what the heck is a Space Marine? What are those weird green things? Well, I mean, people will recognize an orc even if they don't know much about the 40k space or the 40k orcs. But either way, um, I'm going to try to do as much of it as I can from what I know about the lore. I don't know. Some of my friends think that I should do a lore channel, but really, all I do is just watch other lore channels. So, oops, that's the wrong one. That's the Space Marine thing. First, I should cover the Imperium of Man. Now, mind you, if someone comes in during this stream, and tells me that they want me to try to talk a bit about a faction, then I will do my best to talk about what I remember. And if people don't like my descriptions, I will try to play a lore video from one of the channels that I particularly like. Except for Baldermort. Not because Baldermort isn't good. Baldermort is great, in my opinion. And if you're going to be drawing or doing something, Baldermort is the best, in my opinion. Because he's just, well, if I do a longer lore stream, I will try to talk about or play one of his videos, but either way. Also, I wanted to set this to a 40k, Warhammer 40k, instead of just chatting, but every 40k category is for a video game. And I did not want to get people to come in and then go, but why aren't you playing the video game? The game that you're tagged as. So, without further ado, in the 41st millennium, there is only war. Now, I started talking a bit yesterday at the end of the Subnautica Below Zeros, at the last Subnautica Below Zero stream, about, well, a number of subjects, mostly focused on the orcs. There are several factions. There's the Imperium of Man, which holds several factions within it. The Sororitas, the Custodes, the Mechanicus, the Astra Militarum, or rather the Imperial Guard, Imperial Agents, Imperial Knights, and then the Space Marines. Now, why is it that the Space Marines get their own little section, even though they are technically a part of the Imperium of Man? The answer is that there's just so many Space Marine models that they kind of have to get their own little segment. Because there are chapters and the legions and chapters and all this stuff. There used to be Space Marine legions. Each legion of Space Marine is basically the... Well, first I should probably explain what the heck a Space Marine is. Before that, I need to tell you what a Primarch is. So, actually, let's see if I can... Old rowboat girly man. Oh wait, I have Space Marines here, so see, so relations. Nice. Sorry. Space Marine Where are you, rowboat girly man? Ultramarines. Okay, well, I wanted to find a picture of Rebute Gilliman. I mean, you'd figure that there'd be... He'd be under... Okay. So, I'm having trouble finding the model for Rebute Gilliman, who is a Primarch. But basically, the Imperium of Man is an empire that is supposed to be led by the Emperor of Mankind. He's called the Emperor of Man because, well, most people don't know his name. And he is actually a rather tragic figure. But I'll get into him a little bit later. Because there's just so... The lore of 40k is just so dense and so full of things that sometimes it can be sort of, you know, difficult to figure out where to start with all of the various things that they have. So, I'm going to cut out certain parts of the lore to streamline this, because otherwise I'll spend the entire session that I have talking only about the Emperor of Man. But the Emperor of Man wanted to unify all the humans from the broken previous human empire. The humanity had a I guess I'll talk a little bit about that before too. Before 40k and before 30k, 30k is a period that takes place with events in the, at least for the Imperium of Man, that takes place for the Unification Wars, which is where the Emperor of Man brought his legions of Space Marines and the Primarchs to try to reunify all of the lost and broken parts of the previous human empire, so that humanity would be able to stand together. Now, the super soldiers that he tried to make to help him win this unification war are the Space Marines. And there were 20 legions of Space Marines. Each legion had a Primarch, with the exception of the 20th, which had 2. But that's because I mentioned yesterday at the end of the Subnautica stream a bit about the Immaterium, or the warp. Due to warp shenanigans, one of the Primarchs got split in 2. So although Altharius and Omegon, the twin Primarchs of the 20th Legion, are 2 Primarchs, they technically share one fragmented soul. But either way, what's the significance of a Primarch? A Primarch is a gene father of a legion. So, to make a Space Marine, you take what's called the gene seed of a Primarch from a certain Primarch and put it into a Space Marine candidate, as well as a number of organs that you put, specialty organs that you put into them. And you do a bunch of other stuff, depending on the legion, or rather chapter now. because after the events of 30K, the legions were broken into much smaller chapters. So each Primarch had a different thing they were good at. And as a result, a lot of the people that got the gene seed of the Primarch tend to resemble that Primarch, or in certain ways, such as people who like have the Raven Guard Primarchs, or rather Corvus Corax. This is yes, his name is literally Raven, but they have his gene seed tend to be more quiet, more stealthy, while people who tend to have Rogel Dorns, like that gene seed, tend to be autistic. I mean, sorry, I mean, they tend to be more methodical and stoic, but yes. I'm kidding. I love Rogel Dorn. Rogel Dorn is my favorite Primarch, and I love the Imperial Fists. That did my boy dirty. But yes, so, as I said, basically, each Space Marine has their gene daddy. Who's going to be one of, or there's technically such a thing as hybrid gene seed, where it's one or two or more Primarch's gene seeds are combined to create like a hybrid version. Now, I feel like I'm not staying on task enough. My autism is showing. Oh no. So, actually, let's see if I can find it. I cannot find it. Clear all. I want to just show all. Why can't I just see everything? I'm trying to find the. If I could, you know, I might as well just. Man, I am trying to find some of the basic units, or also like the. Oh yes, the Scout Squad. The Scout Squads are basically Space Marine candidates who are. Well, you know, I've probably made a mistake. There are initiates before they fully finish the process of going through what becomes a Space Marine. I believe they are put in the scouting companies, but I just want to make sure that training is not. Yeah, I was right. I was worried I was wrong, but apparently I am correct. Also, look at this, $65 US. Jesus. 40K is not a cheap hobby. So, Space Marines are the poster child of Warhammer 40K, of the games. And on top of that, they are displayed everywhere, and they tend to receive the most support out of basically all the different factions. Even if they're supposedly focusing on producing like miniatures for a different faction, they almost always simultaneously release a model or two of the Space Marines. And for a long time, they did stupid stuff in the lore, where they would basically go, the Space Marines are the greatest of humanity's champions. There's no one stronger than Space Marines. which was kind of stupid because you see, there is also, I mentioned, and I didn't go into too much detail, they have the Adeptus Custodes, who are the hand-picked, handcrafted defenders and will of the Emperor of Mankind. They are literally the guys that he made who are supposed to be his trusted confidants and people who he can fully trust both in their loyalty to him as well as their efficiency and ability to get things done. People refer to Space Marines as the Emperor's Angels of Death. While that is, being kind of dramatic, and to the local populace, or the local people, or the regular people of the Imperium, a Space Marine is something they will probably never see. Because although there's so much of them shown in the lore, and they appear in all the pictures, there are relatively small amounts of Space Marines. Hi person, I am talking about Warhammer 40k and Space Marines. So, person, as a short recap, there's Space Marines. A Space Marine is a super soldier that has a gene daddy, and that gene daddy has his gene seed put into the Marine. And if they succeed and don't reject it or die from a result of it, they become a Space Marine. I mean, there's a lot more to that, but I figure, I don't want to bash you over the head with all the terminology, like the black carapace or the specialty organs a Space Marine have. I mean, if you have an interest in that, I can start talking about it. Warhammer 40k has very deep lore, and eventually, person, you might want to hear about all that extra stuff, but when you're just starting to get in, I'm going to try to keep it simple. A lot of people don't like Space Marines, and I'm talking about as fans of the series, person, because Space Marines receive constant support. They receive, many model updates, many new models. Almost every release there is at least one Space Marine update or new model. Meanwhile, even when they're focusing on releasing, focusing on we're focusing on one of the neglected factions, because some of the factions still use the old models from 20 or 30 years ago, and they look rough. Some of them look rough, but yeah. Now, when talking about Space Marines, people might talk about legions, but in the 40k setting there are really no legions, because they were broken down into something called chapters, which are, they're big, but they're not the size of a legion. A full Space Marine Legion, which varied how much there was, but basically could conquer a sector by itself, of a galaxy by itself. The legions would send chapters of their own Marine to basically conquer planets, or now, due to something called the Horus Heresy, it was decided that no one should be able to control a full legion of Space Marines. It's also why the 40k setting for the Imperium of Man is so weirdly broken up and doesn't really work with itself. Because the Horus Heresy basically one guy had developed daddy issues because his dad's like, you know what, son, I trust you. I have to go back and finish a project that I can't tell you about what it is right now, but I trust you. And then he left and was like, fuck you, Dad! And rebelled and broke half the empire. And basically, yeah. As a certain joke a certain lore person created, he developed male pattern baldness and joined the dark side. And then sold his soul to hell. But because of the devastation caused by people joining the arch traitor Horus, the various armies of the Imperium of Man were broken and separated from each other. And as a result, cooperation is kind of hard. But either way, Space Marines have a lot to go on, but to kind of give you an idea about of Space Marines, I need to talk a little bit about the other Imperial factions. Also, Space Marines are only men. Now, people who don't understand the setting go, why can't there be female Space Marines? You don't want to be a female Space Marine. Being a regular Space Marine sucks. As a Space Marine, your job is to die. Becoming a Space Marine means you basically give up a lot of the parts that make you human. You are genetically sterilized, so you can't have children. You are taken as a child. You are basically gone through torture. You are indoctrinated, and you have, well, you have a lot of stuff. And then you're basically become like a mutant. Space Marines have something which is called transhuman dread, which basically means that if you're facing regular humans or a regular people, you will scare the shit out of them. They'll scare the shit out of them by just being there. Through the process of becoming a Space Marine, they become a bit larger, stronger, more durable. They are able to regenerate from wounds that would normally kill people. Or, things that people would normally die from are considered minor. Their blood clots ultra quickly. They're able to spit acid from their mouth. Well, some of them do, but I'm not going to go into flaws. But either way. Depending on the Legion and depending on the character, a Space Marine might just be basically almost like a machine because of how lacking in humor, empathy, and all that other stuff. That's not to say that there aren't caring Space Marines. The Salamanders, for example, are ironically the most human of all Space Marines. And I say ironically because they're black. I don't mean like, oh my god, they are of African descent. No. They are literally charcoal black with glowing red eyes. And they literally set everything on fire and burn everything to the ground. Which then goes like, how are those guys the most human? Well, the answer is, unlike most Space Marines, when you become a Space Marine, the person you were before is dead. The family that you may have are considered to be strangers. They no longer matter. You will not contact them anymore. If you see them, you will probably never recognize them. unless you are a salamander, or a from the salamander chapter, or of the descent of the Vulcan, who is the Primarch of the salamanders. The jolly green giant, Vulcan, yes. The largest, most muscular Primarch, who is honestly the most friendly guy. His chapter makes it so that, unlike almost every other chapter of Space Marines, you are allowed to, you're not just allowed, but encouraged to stay in contact with your family. And as a result, the Salamander chapter is one of the very few chapters of Space Marines that actually cares about the common man and the common people of the Imperium. Although the job of Space Marines is to defend the Imperium of Man, a lot of them view themselves as a higher existence to the common human being, and will straight up just, oh, look, there are enemies over there. Oh, wait, there's regular humans there, like refugees? I don't care, bomb the entire area. Ha 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 ha. Well, yes, they died, I do not care. And then, you have the salamanders who will literally put themselves in a disadvantageous position to save people. That's not to say that the salamanders don't commit war crimes, but yeah. So I think I've covered. Well, now as I said, I have to cover a bit more about the other factions for you to understand a little bit more about the Space Marines. I'm not getting into Primaris Marines at the moment. That'll come up later, if at all, during this stream. So, there are, for the regular Imperium forces, there are the Adeptus Sororitas, which are the militant branch of the Church in the 40k universe. Now, the Sororitas are most commonly drawn in fan art as these beautiful, attractive, near flawless looking women. However, according to the lore, they are often not really attractive. They are often scarred, very fit, the peak of non-augmented human condition, and they don't give a shit if they look like shit. They will burn and kill all the enemies of mankind and all heretics, the heretic, the mutant, and the witch. Now, due to all this stuff, the Sororitas have a heavy, religious theme to their chapter. They're basically nuns with guns. Now, as I said, they're all super religious. Like Space Marines, they wear power armor. God, I didn't mention power armor with the Space Marines. I am a failure. But the Sororitas are an almost, if you're an Adeptus Sororitas, they only allow women in. If they're a man, you're probably just a regular priest, or you're a heretic that's been hooked up to a penitent engine, which I'll get into that later. Now, there are a lot of designs. There's also priests, but due to a number of things occurring, the church in the Imperium of Man is not allowed to have any men-at-arms. So the Adeptus Sororitas is literally getting away from the term men-at-arms. Now, they have a lot of really sort of like crazy designs. Like for their vehicles, let's see. Their vehicles often have church themes. Like this is their exorcist tank, or not tank, exorcist assault vehicle. And as you notice, they have a pipe organ, and those things inside are missiles. So they have a missile launching pipe organ on top of their vehicle. And you can see they have various iconography, and it's sort of to represent like a moving church. Oh yes. And they have also got well, there in the Imperium there are these things people call the living saints, which are people who are blessed by the Emperor of Mankind, and they gain super like these extremely tremendous powers. The most famous of them in the current setting is Celestine, or Saint Celestine, who I think you can tell which of the three this one it is, but it's the one in the back with the angel wings, the actual angel wings. The living saints can be killed, but most of them will be able to come back afterwards. Saint Celestine was once a sororitas before becoming a living saint. However, if I remember correctly, she was actually a Sister Repentia. Now, for the most part, 40k does not, with the exception of the Slut faction, which we'll get into the Slut faction later. And yes, you heard me, Slut faction. Those of you in the know will know. But most of the time, the women in 40k are not wearing skimpy outfits. Yes, person, you will learn of Slanesh, unfortunately. But basically, the Sister Repentia are one of the few examples of sort of like a fantasy-like setting, although it makes sense in sort of the setting. Now, the Sisters of Battle are, which is another name for the Adeptus Sororitas, because technically, the ones that are represented on the tabletop and most often in games are the Chamber Militant of the Adeptus Sororitas. They are a lot of different ones. There's not that some of them are like nurses and healers, and then there are like some who are basically there are various different non-combat branches. I'm not going to get into that, but because I'm going on enough tangents as is. But all of them are extremely religious. They're all fanatics. And one of the abilities that they have is that as I mentioned about the Immaterium and Warp, about how belief, and having enough belief can give you certain powers or abilities, the sheer fanaticism and power of their belief allows them to alter fate and empower themselves to a degree. Now, mind you, they're not as strong as a full-blown Psyker. But the fact that they are able to go up against Space Marines, which are, as I mentioned, genetically engineered, like powered up super soldiers by themselves, when all they're really wearing they're basically just unaugmented women in power armor. And their power armor is supposedly inferior to Space Marine power armor. Well, for one, there's a lot more sororitas than there are Space Marines. You're more likely to see a sororitas than you are to see a Space Marine. Although there are less sororitas than there are like Imperial Guard. At the lowest, I would say the lowest of the Imperium's fighting force, is the PDF, the Planetary Defense Force, or the PDF. There are some PDFs which are pretty good at their job, but for the most part, planetary defense forces are made up of the common citizen, like people who could not get into the Imperial Guard. Now it's kind of confusing to some people because, like, wait a second, didn't you say the Custodes are, the guys who protect the Emperor? Why aren't they called the Imperial Guard? Which is, no, they're not. The Imperial Guard are the regular humans. I mean, they are the peak of regular humanity. If you are, they are equivalent to like special forces compared to the PDF. But most people who don't read the source, don't read the books or other things, do not know about the PDF because you can't play as them. And to be fair, why would you want to? They are the Imperial Guard, as I said, they are the special forces of the Imperium, or one of them technically, although they're used like a regular army. So most people don't think of them that way. Whenever somebody invades a planet, the PDF will get involved. If the PDF is having problems, the Guard are sent in. Most people will probably see a guardsman, which is, the term for a regular soldier of the Imperial Guard. Let's see. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of this stuff, they only show the Cadians, and they only show the Cadians and the Tempestus Scions, and there's a Commissar, but I'll get into that. Now, the Imperial Guard is, and then there's the Ogrins, which are, they're sort of funny. But either way, depending on what world the Imperial Guard regiment is raised from, will drastically change the equipment and appearance of the guardsmen. Now, as I said, unfortunately, in more recent years, well, actually not all that more recent, maybe like 10 years ago. I'm not sure about when, don't quote me for the time. But the Cadians are, or were, to be fair, from a planet called Cadia. Oh, I know, isn't that shocking? Well, Cadia blew up. And Abby got salty that he lost, so he blew it up. But either way, there are, for the different regiments, there's the as I mentioned, the Cadians. They're the ones who are usually in the green armor, and most pictures you see of the Imperial Guard are featuring Cadians. There are different, even in the different groups, there are various special forces. Like the Cadians are the regular forces. Then there are the Kasserkan, which are basically the special forces of the Cadians. I'm kind of having trouble because all the units I'm specifically looking for are not listed here, which is kind of rough. But most regiments of the Guard have a special forces branch, which is basically the Tempestus Scions. Although they don't always call them the Tempestus Scions. As I said, for the Cadians, they're theirs are referred to the Kasserkin. If I'm pronouncing that right, don't quote me. But either way, the Imperial Guard are basically regular humans. And if you're playing a guard army, you're probably going to lose a bunch of units. Even if you're winning and doing really well, you're going to lose a bunch of guys. Because you are sort of a horde army. You're also going to have a bunch of... Well, the guard can be done several ways. You can do literal legion of the guardsmen. Or you can build a... Oh, I didn't know there was a Rogaldor in Battle Tank. Representing my man Rogaldor. But, basically... Oops, sorry. The guard are often used as a vehicle army. Because their vehicles are a lot cheaper than the other factions. And depending on which branch of the guard you're playing, they can be even cheaper. So they have a bunch of they tend to use a bunch of tanks, like the Lehman Russ is sort of like the bread and butter of, from what I have not played 40k, but from what I've heard other people, the Lehman Russ is sort of the bread and butter of their assault tanks. The Shadow Sword is a variant of one of their super heavy vehicles, which is a Bane Blade. I had to say it that way. Sorry, that's because that's sort of like the meme where somebody in one of the games was like, "A Bane Blade." It's like, what? Which, you know, some of the lore, the wacky dumb lore, and then there's, well, wait a second. Okay, well, one thing you might notice is you see they have a Hellhammer here and a Shadow Sword here. And if you notice, the only difference is the gun, real difference other than the color, is the main gun on top, because they use the same base model. A Shadow Sword and a Hellhammer are variants of the Bane Blade tank. You can basically turn your Bane Blade into a Hellhammer or a Shadow Sword. Since I covered it, a Shadow Sword is basically an anti-super heavy tank. It has a big old gun, and its job is to take out Imperial Titan, or take out Titans or other super heavy vehicles. Which means that if you're not fighting someone using a super heavy vehicle when you have this thing, what in the world are you doing? But the Hellhammer, if I remember correctly, is they shrank the size of the gun so it could fire more often, and it's more of an anti-personnel equivalent of the Bane Blade. And then, of course, you have the actual Bane Blade, which is just a super heavy tank, which is the most common one, which is they're very rare. One of the themes of 40k is stagnation and the loss of technology for all sides, with the exception of the Necrons, which I didn't mention anywhere. Spooky, basically Necrons are spooky, scary, space Terminator skeletons. Cyborg undead, basically. But as you can see, there's a lot of vehicles for the Astra Militarum. Oh yeah, they are here. These are one of the special Imperial Guard, the Catachan, which you can tell the Catachan have not been updated in a while. So basically, just imagine that you have a whole planet full of Rambo, or everyone on the planet is just literally Rambo. instead of wearing the normal armor and stuff that the normal soldiers have, the Kachan jungle fighters are basically running around on the battlefield half naked, or in some case just like, fully naked, and just, well, okay, usually not fully naked, at least they have pants most of the time. Charging in with a knife and then, just doing silly things, like macho things, but yeah. Now, in the lore, the Kachan jungle fighters are just like scary and like very effective. However, from what I've heard in the tabletop game, the problem is that guardsmen are not particularly sturdy in comparison to most things. I mean, compared to modern humans, they are terrifying. But when you're comparing it to somebody who can to enemies that can literally rip holes into their tanks with their bare hands, I'm sorry. But your squishy, unaugmented human is not going to do much against a literal guy who can bust a tank with his fist. So yeah. Oh, the man, the myth, the legend, Sly Marbo. Oh! You wouldn't get the joke. It's just, he is a silly meme, and his stuff is just hilarious. But yeah, the things that he has done or that are attributed to him are just almost nonsensical. He is, as I mentioned, he is from a planet where basically everyone is Rambo, but he is like their Rambo, like taking out entire Chaos warbands, taking out a Titan, a Chaos Titan single-handedly, and then just just a bunch of like what, oh my god, that's not like such crazy nonsense. The Death Corps of Krieg, which people go like, it's space Germans from World War One, which it's like, the only reason they say that is because Krieg is the German word for war. But in actuality, apparently their uniforms are actually based off of the French soldiers from World War One. But yeah. So out of all the forces that you might see in most battles of the Imperium, the Imperial Guard are the most common soldiery. They are sent basically to almost every engagement, and it's their job to basically hold the line or solve things. The common human in 40k will fight all the horrors of that the setting has to offer. However, if a Space Marine is present, then that means things got real bad. And that most usually means that they are not going, the most guardsmen are probably going to die. Usually Space Marines are only called in when there is a major force of the hungry space bugs, or the Tyranids, and overwhelming Orc Wa, which basically a Wa is what the Orcs call like a big gathering of their boys when they're fighting. And the Orcs are sort of one of the two punching bags of the 40k setting. The other being the Tyranids. And the only reason for that is because, due to the nature of both the Orcs and the Tyranids, even if you seemingly wipe them out, they will come back, and they will come back in larger numbers. So you can basically, use the Orcs or Tyranids as the throwaway enemies. Like, oh, look at him, he beat up so many Orcs and Tyranids. Because, it doesn't matter if the orcs lose billions of soldiers, because they will still have trillions more. And it's the same for the Tyranids, though there's probably more Tyranids than orcs. Which is kind of bad. But either way, the Imperial Guard is on most, engagements that the Imperium has. The Sororitas may also be present. And I haven't even talked about the Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus is sort of their own faction. Oh, wait. I should also mention what a Commissar is. This guy here on this picture for the Astra Militarum is a Commissar. Their job is to ensure the loyalty of the men. And because 40k is a grim, dark setting, if the Commissar thinks you're feeling treasonous, or if he feels like you're about to run away, or if you have committed an act of cowardice in front of them, they will probably execute you on the spot. And by executing you on the spot, it will raise the morale of all the Imperial Guard around you. Now, most Commissars are like that. However, there are a few who would rather inspire through loyalty and being an overall really good guy, which one of my favorite characters of the setting, Commissar Caiaphas Kane, is one of those. He's also known as the hero of the Imperium, but I don't want to talk too much about him, or else I'll spend the entire section talking about him. So, Imperial Guardsman is, as I mentioned, better than a PDF soldier. Above the Guardsman, I would say, is a Space Marine. Because although it does occur in the lore, it is unlikely that the average Imperial Guardsman would be able to defeat a Space Marine. The Space Marine has more armor, the Space Marine is faster, the Space Marine is stronger, and the Space Marine on average has better weapons. The primary armament of an Imperial Guard is something called a lasgun, which is basically a laser rifle. In terms of sci-fi weapons, a lasgun is a very strong man-portable weapon, which the charge pack can be used as a grenade. It has you can fire thousands of rounds of the shot, or you can modify it so that each shot is stronger. Each shot is strong enough so that if it hits open flesh, it's likely going to cauterize the wound. And these lasguns are referred to as flashlights in the setting, because that's how strong they are against most of their enemies. And also, they're not really good against Space Marine armor. However, some Imperial Guards do carry weapons which can easily kill a Space Marine. Like the thing this guy here is holding. Now, he's a Castellan, which means he's an important figure. He's an officer. I don't think he is. Well, I'm thinking about the Lord Castellan before, which I guess is different. My knowledge on certain parts of the lore my knowledge of lore is biased. There are factions I know a lot more about, and there are factions which I don't know much about. The Cadians didn't particularly interest me, so I didn't learn a lot about them. Their homeworld is blown up. But before that, they had a bunch of interesting lore, like to know about chaos and the warp Well, knowing about the warp is okay. Some parts of the warp is fine. But if you learn about chaos in the setting, you are empowering chaos. By giving it a name and and knowing it, for an average human, you are literally strengthening your enemy, which is why the Imperium of Man does everything it can to hide and keep secret the forces of the warp and the demons and various people there. Now, one of the few examples is Cadia, before it got blown up. The Cadians are located on one of, or what was, a large rip in reality called the Eye of Terror, which is literally a opening from reality directly into the warp, which is usually where the Chaos fleets invade from. Cadia was the first line of defense against the people who are trying to get out of the Eye of Terror. And as a result, all Cadians were raised with knowledge of the warp. And on top of that, for some reason, due to their exposure to energies from the warp, due to the proximity of Cadia, all Cadians have violet eyes. Although you can't exactly see that here, and maybe they just colored it black. Skin tone can be whatever you want, like humans and stuff. But one of the things that Cadians are known for are being really strong, really well trained, and having violet, sort of almost glowing eyes, if I remember correctly. But either way, the weapon this guy's carrying is something called a plasma pistol. Plasma weaponry can easily melt through Space Marine armor and wipe them out. Now, as I said, all over the universe or all over like the setting, the Imperial Guard are basically engaged in most battles. Like 90% of the battles, I'd say, for the Imperium of Man. Now, I guess maybe I'm even saying too much, or bumping up the number of Space Marines. But I'd say like 9% of the rest of the battles have Space Marines in them. The Imperial Guard is also there, keep in mind, because the Space Marines rarely act by themselves. They are often work. Okay. Depending on which guard regiment they are working with, and depending on the Space Marine chapter, will affect whether the guard and the Space Marines actively work together or whether they are almost actively hostile with each other. It sounds stupid, but it's also done so that way it makes sense in gameplay wise why two factions that are supposed to be on the same side are fighting each other. But oftentimes Space Marines refuse to work with the irregular humans. But either way, what a Space Marine is to a guardsman, a custodian, like what a Space Marine is to a regular human, a custodian is to a Space Marine, which is to say that a single custodian can take out a horde of Space Marines by themselves. And they are smarter, faster, stronger, and their average unit in the tabletop that's not going off of their lore strength, because their lore strength, the custodians usually will really not lose. They only really lose when they're going up against, a bad guy, or like the setting villain, or a major power, or unless a writer is being stupid and forgets about what the Custodes are, which happened in one of the books. They mixed up the Custodes with the Imperial Guard, and had a bunch of aliens defeat like a bunch of custodians, which that's not going to happen, especially tabletop wise. It's not to say that there aren't characters that can, or soldiers from other armies that can't easily be custodians, or beat them. Because to be perfectly honest, if you get like a plasma cannon and hit a custodian, the custodian's dead. But that's if you hit them. If you hit them. But either way, each soldier, each unit of the Custodes is basically at the strength of what would be considered a hero in another army. Also, you can see, well, that's a derpy looking model. And then you see this character here. This character here is of a faction that works with the Custodes called the Sisters of Silence, another all-female faction in 40k, although they're almost always attached to the Custodes. Now, the Custodes are basically the peak of augmented people. Unlike Space Marines, a Space Marine, you take a kid, you fill them full of drugs and like add some organs, add a gene seed, and then psycho indoctrinate them and do a bunch of stuff to them, and you get a Space Marine. A Custodes is basically taken from birth, or before they're even born, they are being worked on, and everything they have is basically custom designed for them. The process of making each Custodes is basically specific to each custodian. They are like the Space Marines are mass produced. The Custodians are handcrafted. They are also referred to as, the Custodians are also referred to as the 10,000, because there are usually only 10,000 of them in the entire setting. There are like thousands of different like Space Marine chapters. But it's like the loss of a single custodian is like probably not even worth it, or a single loss of one of them is a devastating like defeat in often cases. I mean, unless of course that they almost single-handedly wipe an army, or depending on who they take out. But at the same time, whenever a custodian takes place in the battle, the Imperium writes it off as a victory. Because, well, how could they lose? They are literally the divine messengers of their god. And, as I said, like, for a regular human to see a Space Marine is sort of like almost like a legend to them because of how rare Space Marines are. But if a human sees a custodian, that is something that they will probably never forget. To give you an idea about sort of like how big of a deal seeing a custodian is to certain people, like people in the Imperium. Like, there was somebody who sold their soul to chaos they saw like regular Space Marines, and as I mentioned, this is an unaugmented person who's devoted themselves to the gods of chaos, and they're saying all the normal stuff like, "Oh, you and your corpse emperor and all that other stuff, like making, like insulting the custodian." And Adeptus Custodes steps into the room, at which point the, as I said, up until that point, devout worshipper of chaos begins to just weep and begins just to apologize for going against the God Emperor just because he's there. Because as I said, in the very religious Imperium, the custodes are basically the chosen few who represent the Emperor. So seeing one is basically like saying, "Oh my God, the Emperor willed him to come to see me. I've betrayed his trust. I have done all that stuff." And just, as I said, having a single custodian on the battlefield on the side of the Imperium will immediately raise the morale of all Imperial forces in the area, because they believe the God Emperor himself has blessed their battle. Now, depending on the custodian, some of them are heavily autistic, I will say. Regular Space Marines are kind of autistic too, but their people skills are terrible. Now, there are some Space Marines that are good, but for the most part, custodians make a lot of the terribly socially inept Space Marines look like the most socially conscious people ever. That's not to say that there aren't custodians who are full of humanity and are kind, but a number of them just see the average person as, inferior, or just, not much. If you want to build an army in this game that is, real people fighting for more understandable goals, then following the stories of the Imperial Guard are a lot more relatable. Space Marines are, if you want more spectacle. Custodians are hard to appreciate their stories, because, if you're a regular person fighting for your home and all that other stuff is a lot more relatable than I am trying to figure out ways to keep the entire galaxy from collapsing. And shit, I didn't talk about the girl in this picture, the Sisters of Silence. Now, the Sisters of Silence are completely unaugmented women. They are something called a psychic blank. Now, I've mentioned the warp and how it allows you to manifest psychic powers or space magic. But there are certain individuals called nulls, and their ability is to, depending on what level they are, impair or completely negate the powers of the warp. Or in some cases, just, warp demons are not real. Well, they're technically not real. They exist as, well, their bodies aren't really real. So doing damage to one without using psychic powers, a weapon that produces anti-chaos or anti-psychic or psychic effects, or, stuff like that, will be next to impossible. I mean, in the game, it's easier, but in the setting itself, you just can't kill some unless you're using, sheer amounts of nukes and other things, or just using thousands of tanks firing at a single demon over and over and over again. Then you can overwhelm their healing factor. But that is unless you have a null or the Sister of Silence. The Sisters of Silence can remake demons and other warp entities mortal, as well as hampering a bunch of their powers. Now, if they can do all that, you'd think that, oh, they're a support class. I mean, technically, but that's not why that you can. As you can see, she's carrying a sword. They very much engage in close combat because, when you have abilities to disrupt psychic powers, getting up close and personal with the enemy to prevent their psychic powers is important. Now, as I mentioned, the Sisters of Silence are unaugmented. They are everything they do is literally because of the crazy amounts of training they go through. And they're able to keep up with custodians, which is insane. As I mentioned, literally the custodians are the hand-picked peak of the Imperium of Man's forces. In terms of common soldiers, there's bigger things that are more powerful, but they are not. That's another thing. But yeah, I mean, the Sisters of Silence are still not as strong as a custodian, but I mean, they can keep up with them, and they work alongside. The custodians are able to kill any basically mortal foe. What the custodians can't regularly kill, the Sisters of Silence are basically able to anchor to the material realm so the custodians can kill them more easily. Although, depending on the threat, they may not need a custodian. As I mentioned, the Sisters of Silence are also very strong. However, they are, or at least in the game, one second, they don't really have any ranged capability. They're essentially just stuck with either swords or flamethrowers. And there's a ton of stuff I haven't mentioned. Oh my god, is that $28 for a hand? Jesus. Wait, does a Telemon literally just not come with a hand at all? Okay, so I'm going to describe a few things I've actually not talked about. So, for Space Marines and like custodians, they share some equipment types. However, the difference is the quality and ability, and also just the effectiveness of said equipment. So, regular custodians have their own set of power armor, which is just much better than regular Space Marine power armor. There is a heavier, slower kind of power armor, which is called Terminator armor. And that's, as I said, it's bulkier, it's slower. Like, you see, this is like the Custodes Terminator armor. Now, Custodes, unlike for normal Space Marines, their Terminator armor is really slow. Like, in addition to basically becoming a walking tank, your mobility is usually affected. However, for the custodians, not so much. As I mentioned, the Emperor made, the Emperor made a lot of great weaponry for the Space Marines, but he saved the best stuff for his favorites, and for his personal bodyguards, the Custodes. So the result is that anything the Space Marines can do, the Custodians can basically do so much better. And faster, and, you know, like everything else. The armor that Space Marines use is actually not made of metal. It is made of a composite material called ceramite, which is like a special ceramic thing. It's very resistant to heat. It's very strong. Now, this golden armor that the Custodians wear is a stronger, more powerful version called auroramite. That's why it looks gold. It's not. It's auroramite. And not many forces outside of the Custodians in the Imperium use auroramite. One of the characters I know that does have it is the Primarch Rogel Dorn. That's why he has that golden armor, is auroramite. But either way, there are also you'll also notice, well, nowadays some Space Marines get hover vehicles, like or grab vehicles, which, like, you know, you see here, they're basically like sort of like these speed bikes. They're still not as good as the Custodian weaponry. The Custodians have access to technology that is lost for the rest of the Imperium. I mean, still not common, but they do have it. And then there is, to the top of the next thing, a dreadnought. Now, a dreadnought is basically a walker that has a either seriously damaged Space Marine or seriously damaged Custodian placed inside. Now, it's a way of basically preserving them and making sure that they are able to continue fighting. For Space Marines, it's done mostly to, like, keep valuable members of the chapter still alive. Now, it's often also said to be sort of like a weird and sort of unpleasant feeling, because they're basically stuck in a tube and placed inside. Now, for Custodians, they're different. They may, if one of their rare dreadnoughts is available, one of their soldiers may volunteer to literally have themselves wounded or become placed inside the said dreadnought, because they're just so effective and powerful in battle. Custodians are sort of crazy due to the nature of their the importance of what they are and what they do. If a Custodian's combat efficiency is decreased by 1%, they retire from being Custodian. They give up all their armor and equipment and just go around the galaxy fighting threats and also gathering intelligence for the Emperor and other Custodians. Which, how they are able to do that as like a 12-foot tall demigod is I don't know how they're able to hide that. But sometimes the lore is wacky that way. Hey, look at that 12-foot tall guy. Well, he might not be 12 foot, they might be like 10. But either way, they are literal giants. But, okay, I've gone probably a bit too far, and I was supposed to mention other stuff too. So, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the literal IT guys of the Imperium. Now, the Mechanicus is also a person. Are you starting to get? Have I been mentioning too much stuff, or am I boring you? Because this is a lot to take in. Okay, just making sure. So the Mechanicus are basically the people who build and maintain the Imperium's weapons and vehicles. Now, they are sort of strange in the setting because, due to various things in the setting, in the Imperium, worshipping anyone other than the Emperor of Man is considered heresy. And you will be killed for worshipping something else. Now, that sounds terrible, but in the setting, it's very important. Because oftentimes, unless you've been psychically trained to tell the difference between the gods that you're worshipping or who you're sending prayer or, power to, because belief is power in this setting, as I said, you could be empowering the chaos gods, which is a very bad thing. And so the Mechanicus believes in the Omnissiah, or the machine god, basically. Now, some believe the Emperor to be the earthly form of the Omnissiah, which is why they're sort of allowed to get away with that. Also, the fact that if people try to press the Mechanicus, they're usually like, oh, okay, well, I guess you don't want us to maintain your weapons anymore. Good luck without being able to fix your vehicles. And I'm like, no, I need my guns to kill heretics. But yes, so we've covered the Sororitas. We've covered the Custodians. Now, the Mechanicus believe the flesh is weak. So they will often just literally cut off parts of their body or remove parts of their body and replace it with technology. And yes, for people who watch later on, I'm aware the flesh is weak is basically something the Iron Hands say. I'm also aware that it's from Vulcan, who Vulcan said it to Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands. Sorry, just throwing that aside. I know it basically sounds like I said gibberish, but there are some people like, oh, actually. So yes. Now, with the exception of the stuff that the Emperor and a few of his scientists have made, the Mechanicus has the best stuff in the set in the Imperium, because they have some access to things from the dark age of technology. Oh my! It had been a while. It's surprising. It's too bad that the bots don't count as actual viewers. Because, if that was the case, I would already be a Twitch partner. I usually have 1 or 2 bots in addition to you on every stream. If the bots counted, I would already have it, yeah. But until recently, where now they are allowing some innovation, for a long time the Mechanicus were like, we have already reached the peak of technology for humanity. We refuse to develop or innovate, which has led to a stagnation of, technology and of weapons. Now, as I said, in modern setting, things are starting to improve, but a lot of the Mechanicus are still like, no, don't. But yes, the Mechanicus is a mixed bunch. Some of them are like, we need to remove all aspects of our humanity. And then others are basically like, no, keeping a certain amount is important. There are some which are like, hey, you know, we should study the what technology the enemy has. And there are others that are like, no, humanity's like technology is the best. And look, studying enemy or like alien technology is heresy, which may get the Inquisition involved, which is a faction I did not talk about yet, which I'm not going. Basically, the Inquisition's job is to, you know, be an Inquisition. There are many different branches. The three major branches are people who go after demons and, demonic cultists, or the Order Hereticus, the people who go after aliens, or people who might be cooperating with Xenos, the Order of Xenos, which basically hunts down, as I said, the alien and other stuff like that. And then, wait, I forgot the name of the last one, but it's basically the branch that makes sure that nobody is trying to rebel from the Imperium. There are a lot more branches, but as I said, there are three main orders of the Inquisition, which I just mentioned. And some of them also cover technological heresy, or tech heresy, which, yeah. And then, of course, there are Puritan and, there's the Puritan and the, fuck, what is it? I forgot what the other term is. The Puritan Inquisitors are basically the guys who are just like, no, exactly as written. No adapting, no anything else. While the other kind of, like, Inquisitors may be willing to work with aliens, use demons, do heretical things in the service of the greater good or their own agenda. Now, it's often a joke made that the Inquisition does a lot more harm than good. Also important to note, due to the fact that AI rebelled against people in the age before 40k, in what was referred to as the Men of Iron, AI is not allowed in the 40k setting under the Imperium of Man. Which is why, instead of robots, they have what are called servitors, which is basically they take a human body and they basically turn it into a mind-wiped cyborg. And these mind-wiped cyborgs are basically just used for manual labor, combat, and a bunch of other things. I guess now that I mentioned that, I have to talk about the machine spirit. Machine spirits are something that is believed to basically be a spirit each machine and weapon has. When the machine spirit is happy, it works fine. When you have not been properly taking care of your machine spirit, or it is unhappy, it is more likely to make, or you have your weapon jam, or malfunction, or various other things. So, although these are the science guys, they are extremely religious as well. However, due to the fact that Space Marine isn't going to really do much with the Mechanicus, if I remember correctly, it's kind of not really worth getting into them at this point, unless you want to learn more about the Men of Mars, which, Mars is their main their main, planet, where they build stuff. They have a number of worlds where they actually build different things, and there are different patterns of equipment. If something is referred to as a Mars pattern weapon or vehicle, that means it was made on Mars. Different patterns come from different planets and also have well, also to have slightly different styles and slightly different ways they are made. Certain patterns are better than others, and certain ones are more reliable than others. We've covered the guard. Imperial agents are basically all the rest of the stuff that we're not talked about. Like Imperial agents from the Ordo Xenos, the Ordo Hercus, and the Ordo Malleus, yes. Xenos is aliens, Hereticus is like, you know, chaos and like religious heresy, and Malleus is, you know, traitors. Now, this is a lot of this stuff is also just the like inquisitors and the inquisitors' retinue. Like Eisenhorn is a famous inquisitor from the Eisenhorn series of books. Now, some of these are also not inquisitors. Some of them are like other stuff, like the Mistorum Priest, which was also in, you know, the like Sisters of Battle. The Sisters of Battle will sometimes work with the Ordo like Hereticus. God, I hope I'm not mixing up Hereticus and Malice. But yeah. Now, the reason why there's a single Astartes here, which is, you know, and he's called a Watch Captain, is because he's a part of a faction of the Space Marines called the Death Watch. Each, well, actually, these two factions, Hereticus and Xenos, have their own branch of Space Marines that work for them. For the Ordo Xenos, they have the Death Watch, which are basically, they're not really a chapter actually. The Death Watch is made of volunteers from many different chapters of Space Marines to go on the Long Watch. Their job is to basically be anti-alien specialists. And as I said, they work directly for the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition. For the Ordo Hereticus, they have the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are very, very special. However, gauging how strong those Grey Knights are can be difficult due to the fact that their lore is inconsistent and sometimes very stupidly written. Each Grey Knight is a Psyker. Also, rather than having a Primarch as the gene father of the Grey Knights, they have their gene seed directly from the Emperor of Mankind himself. Which, while yes, he is basically a corpse on a throne right now, but he was the most powerful Psyker. Potentially in the setting. Maybe with the exception of the literal god of psychic power. Also, I'll be right back. I need to do something quickly. I'm sorry about that. I'll be right back. Alright then. Sorry. I realized I was... Okay, so... I was talking about the Grey Knights, but, I really don't think I need to talk about that right now. They're interesting, but, you know... Now when I go into that, I might have to go... Oh, sorry. They have a lot of stuff. A few things I'm going to specify, though. Navigators. To be able to pass through the warp, you need to have a navigator. Navigators can clearly see through the... Oh, that's Space Marine. Sorry. Can clearly see through the warp and allow you to more easily traverse it. Now, the warp is not friendly, to say the least. In order to go through it, you need something called a Geller field. Now, depending on which lore you're going by, there are different things that what it can be, whether it's a piece of technology or whether you're going with the grim derp interpretation. Now, to specify what I mean by grim derp, now you see, grim dark is for a really dark, grim setting. Grim derp is when it goes too far and it's no longer dark, it just seems more like, you know, like, every step this guy takes, a baby is teleported underfoot, and so when he puts his foot down, he crushes the baby. And it's just like, okay, yeah, no, really, okay, sure. Sure. Grim derp is like what makes, is like, you know, when they're going too far to where it only becomes funny or silly. Now, as I was saying, if you don't have a Geller field, basically, a Geller field is a shield that keeps the warp entities from doing horrible, unspeakable things to everyone on board the ship. And it's not only for the Imperium, even for the forces of chaos. They need Geller fields too, because the warp is full of random entities. As I said, every possible thought a sentient being has had exists somewhere in the warp. The warp is also, one thing I didn't mention also, the warp is kind of strange, because once something becomes sort of manifested in the warp as a god, or like a god level, it becomes basically permanent. It will have existed in the past. So the reason why there was a hole in reality called the Eye of Terror is because of the birth of the god of excess, Slaanesh. Now, although Slaanesh was born, and that is when that occurred, it, as I said, caused a hole in reality. Slaanesh, technically, due to warp craziness, existed before that. It's just that, you know, once that time occurred, she basically became a fixed point in time. The warp is hard to understand, and it's impossible to properly quantify. But either way, even if you are on the forces of chaos, that doesn't mean that if you don't have a Geller field on, you're not going to be annihilated by the entities of the warp, whether it be from a rival chaos faction or whether it's just by crazy creatures or beings that just live in the warp. There are many different things, and the craziest thing is most of the stuff that people read or talk about occur from what is basically the surface level of the warp. There's the deep warp, which even the chaos gods are afraid of going into. but you're never really gonna hear them talk about that. So these are Imperial assassins like the Vindicare, the Calexis, and the Eversor. They are crazy. Oh, and the reason why I was wondering where Calidus was, but the Calidus is basically an all-female temple. You may be wondering, what type of assassin is this person? I mean, with the others, you can somewhat tell. Like, the Vindicare has a big sniper rifle. I wonder what he does. Blows up people from yards away using special things. He's the most conventional of the Imperium's assassins. Solution to his problem: fire big bullet or special bullet into head of person. Then I'm going to keep him off for a little bit. Eversor, you know, you've succeeded at your job if everyone in the entire room is dead. Eversors are, now most of the other assassins are at least somewhat covert. The Eversor is you don't just want one person dead, you want that person and everyone in the room they're in to be dead. Eversors are basically dropped onto a planet out of orbit and woken up, and then they just basically go crazy, firing, running around, and just being a meat grinder for anything and everything that they come across. And the worst thing for you to do is to actually kill one of them, because they are so full of combat stimulants and drugs that when they die, the chemicals and stimulants make them become unstable, and their body explodes quite spectacularly. So even if you kill one, you may still die from the result of killing one. Which is why even Space Marines are pretty hesitant. Now, the assassins can actually go up against can actually kill Space Marines pretty easily. And then there's also the Calidus assassin, which, as I mentioned, is one of the all-female I think they're all female, actually. But basically, they are kind of weird. They take a chemical which allows them to shapeshift. And, I don't know, somebody made a weird story, which I don't know if it's canon anymore. Basically, using their powers, they were able to eat a baby, swallow it whole, and then walk out while no one knew they had a baby, and then use that baby as like a blackmail the parents of the child into quit being heretics. That writer was weird. Yes, indeed. But yeah. So the job of the Calidus assassin is to infiltrate and impersonate different victims, or use their powers to literally just get close to execute someone. They have a Necron phase blade, if I remember correctly, in one hand. That's that green blade. And then the one that is the most feared by everyone, the Calexis assassin. Ah, yes, they look weird. Now, Calexis assassins are, although you got manly man here, they are not limited to gender. You can be a boy or girl and be a Calidus. Calexis. Yeah, Calexis. But their weird ass headgear they're wearing serves a very, very important purpose. I mentioned before that there are things like nulls, which have the ability to cut off the connection to the warp. And I forgot to mention that, you know, for most people, being around a null, like even the not too strong ones, just the ones that have are slightly able to dampen the warp, it makes them feel uncomfortable. And oftentimes, nulls are just hated by a lot of people because their mere presence makes people feel uncomfortable. Now, depending on the strength the null has in terms of their psychic dampening powers, it may either give, at the very low end, give psychers, or people who use power, who channel the warp, to get either a headache, or it may just straight up kill them from like a brain hemorrhage, just because certain nulls are just so strong in their ability to dampen and like negate the warp that it will kill the psyker. Now, the Calexis assassins are ultra nulls. They are assassins made specifically to hunt down psychically talented, like, opponents. And they scare the shit out of people. As I mentioned, the stronger your power at dampening the warp is, the more revulsion you will bring out of regular people. Like, even if you're a strong enough null, then even against regular people, you may make them feel so hostile and hate you so much just for existing because of your presence that they may try to kill you just without things. Like, in one of the books, there is a null who is a very strong one. Although she is physically beautiful and she is like very talented and has a bunch of things that we consider great, the fact that her powers are so strong makes it so that nobody can stand her. Like, it's just what it is. And another example of a character who may be exhibiting this effect. There's a character named Jurgen from the Caiaphas Cain book series. Jurgen is a null. He's not an ultra strong null, but his unpleasantness is exhibited through his off-putting body odor. It's been shown that no matter how many times he washes himself or cleans his clothes, there always seems to be this unpleasant griminess and smell around him, which some theorize that he's not actually smelly or grimy. He's just, that's how the unpleasantness caused by him being a null manifests itself. Now, it's sort of an iffy thing because when he was on an ice planet, because he's a Valhallan, which was an ice planet, when he was on one, his smell went away and he immediately faded into the background and people couldn't tell where he is. Which, that brings up the question, is it really that he's just a smelly boy, or is it just like, he's adapted to basically being in near sub-zero temperatures? But yeah. The Calexis assassins are especially feared by the space elves because they are almost all of them are very powerful psychers. But I'll get into the Eldar at a different time. Wait. There are also, Is this oh, rogue. I was wondering about that. Rogue traders are literally people who are the one people in the few groups of people in the Imperium that are actually allowed to go and interact with other cultures and make trade. Because the Imperium needs to be able, well, one, it's for finances. Two, it's also because rogue traders can acquire information. But yeah. Okay, so this is a kill team. I was wondering if it was Astartes, but I guess they're not. For Space Marine, we're not really going to need to cover rogue traders. They're an interesting faction, but they are, as I said, not exactly relevant. So it's time to get into the actual most powerful individual units of a faction in the Imperium. For like regular line units. Behold the Imperial Knights faction. Now, I know you can't quite get the full scale, but yeah, here are Knights. Now, this is a regular knight. As you can see, this guy here is a regular sized person. So as you can see, this giant mech suit is actually pretty big. Knights were originally sent as during the early point in 40K's human colonization, before the setting and before the downfall of humanity, when people were setting off to explore the galaxy and we're going to settle new planets. The knights were sent with them. The chainsaw arms were used to help them cut down trees, while a lot of the weapons that were equipped on their other arm would be used to help clear things, and also, or mine or do various other things like that, but also to help defend the new human populations. Now, after many years, the pilots of these knights sort of started to develop these knightly houses, weirdly enough. So, I'm not sure what to focus on for that, but either way, I'm going to cut out the lore and just say big robot guys, because I wanted to cover some stuff about the orcs, because you like the orcs. Basically, if you want to have an army that consists of big old robot boys, then this is the faction. Also, ironically, this is one of the cheaper armies to run, because each unit is so expensive point-wise. To make armies, you have a certain amount of points you can use, and each unit costs a certain amount of points. So while each unit may cost, look at the prices here. Each one of these parts may cost a lot. The fact that you can only maybe have a few knights on the playfield means that overall you're probably spending less money. Because what really is rough is having to buy a horde army, because you need to buy a bunch of little individual units, and that can be especially rough. The smallest knights are the Knight Lancer, or this thing. The next size up is, or wait, is it this one? I thought it's, I'm unfamiliar with this one. Which one is it? So either way, I don't know if this is actually, because I'm looking at the price of this one. I'm now wondering if this one's larger. Haven't been looking at knights lately. So this one here is one of the smaller groups. The smallest, I will say, is the smallest knight. It's noticeably smaller than the other one. Now, but still much larger than most other units that you'll come across. The Knight Paladin, or they'll... Okay, they call them different names, but the Paladin is the same as the Knight Errant, is the same as the Knight Crusader, as the Knight Preceptor, as the Knight Gallant, as the Warden. But yeah, they're the same. They just have different names depending on what type of equipment they have. I would have thought that these guys were like, you know, these Castigator Archon and like, you know, the Lancer would have been smaller too, but they might be the largest one. I don't know. Let me just check it out. Okay, so like, wait. I don't know how big it is. Okay, so it looks like it's... I don't know if it's larger. I'm guessing this one's actually larger than the first one I showed you. But I think it's smaller than the Paladin type ones. The Castellan is noted. The Castellan, the Valiant, and there's not another one. Well, the Valiant and Castellan are the largest knights. They are much bigger. And they are basically the largest stuff that you will probably see on a 40k tabletop game. Unless there's a crazy bastard who's running a Titan. So, a knight, like even the smallest Titan dwarfs even a knight. Let's see if I can find it. Where are you? Or I guess view all. Let's see. Actually, I should go to filters. Let's see. Was it resin? I'm just gonna. Where are the? Okay, I guess online only. I think. The Dark Eldar are the edgelords of space. Also, since I talked about dreadnoughts, behold the Orc dreadnought. Or, well, there are two kinds of Orc dreadnought. This is the one for regular orcs, the Death Dread. Let's see. You know, I want to buy look at Titans. Okay, you know what? Let me just check the filter again. I remember being able to find the Titans. Okay, so. Oh wait. That's a. Those are books. Where is? Okay, you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to actually pull up. Okay, so okay, that's I wanted to. There he is. Where are the? I'm looking for. Okay, I'll just go back here. Titan. Okay, so not Titanicus. God damn it. So, trying to find a Titan. You know, I literally put in Titan, and it's just like, oh, look at all of this stuff. And I just, please, just show me the actual thing that I want to. But yeah, okay, fine. This is the thing I originally showed you. Or wait, no, I shouldn't have done that because now I can't. I should have opened it in the next. God, this is a mess. So there are different types of Titans. So there are Imperial Titans and then there are Chaos Titans. Now, like, just so much crap. So, let's see if I can find it. This is the, behold, the smallest Imperial Titan, the Warhound. And look, behold the price and despair. 670 US dollars. This is the one Titan that you might potentially see if someone was playing it and somebody is just being crazy. Because in most games, this is the only Titan you could feasibly put into a game. And you'd probably have to play as the Imperial Guard, and then you'd basically have, like, I don't know, like, what is it, like 5 regular guardsmen just sitting outside. Meanwhile, you've got, like, oh, okay, 1 second, if I can find it. Oh. I didn't, that's, I was looking for an actual the actual image with the, but nope, they're just doing size comparisons. So, I guess I'll play this one since it's shorter. Person, you want to see how ridiculously large Titans are? Ah, you probably left. Or, like, might be in the middle of something. Oh, because I didn't see. Did you say something before the question mark comment? Because all I see is just like a bunch of nothing. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, I didn't notice any. Well, I didn't see it because it's just like. The last thing I saw on, according to this, is like a while ago, where you were XD ha ha ha, and then just nothing the entire time. And then I was like, oh my god, person usually says stuff. Have I been boring the tar out of you? But yeah, like well, this is the size comparison of the Titans. This is the smallest Titan, the Warhound. These are all models you can buy from Games Workshop. And that's a normal unit. Or wait. No, that's probably a Space Marine. Remember, Space Marines are bigger than normal people. And this is the largest model you can play in the regular 40K. You can't. There are larger Titans in the setting. Like, the largest Titan in the setting you cannot. You can't put on the board. It would cost too much. If I remember correctly, they basically say that this one here is the size of a toddler. Okay, well, you know, this is okay, this is not helpful. They've already gone over it. Is it just 4 more minutes of you, or like 4 more minutes basically, of it going like, whoa, look at this. This one, like, okay.
Hello and welcome.
Oh. Oh no, this thing is actually larger than the others. Why did it look smaller in the picture? Man, I had no knowledge of this. You see, I haven't looked at a lot of the models in like a few years. I have no idea what that is.
My Imperial Knight size.
Actually, I'm going to just go the full thing, so... Let's go. Okay, you know what? I'll just do this because that'll be a good idea for the size comparison. It's also not long. So, regular Imperial Guard, Space Marine, specifically a World Eater. This is a Primaris Space Marine, basically a Space Marine. The shortest Primarch, or Alpharis Omega, who are only slightly bigger than regular. Adeptus Custodes, my boy. A Black Templar, Dreadnought. Or Castaferum, specifically. The tallest Primarch, Vulcan. Literally, as I said, he's black. And has, like, glowing red eyes. A Drop Pod. This is what they'd use to drop Space Marines. They just literally throw them into a planet, it rams into something, and yeah. So here's the Imperial Knight. There are different houses of them. This is, as I said, the smallest of the Imperial Titans. And you see how little that knight is in comparison. Okay, that's stupid. They went from the smallest Titan to the largest one. The Imperator class Titan, which you can't put on the battlefield because it's way too big.
Quick channel update, I set up a Patreon account kind of as a virtual tipping jar, so if you guys want to go and support me there, you can. There's also going to be some like early...
Meh. I don't know. Titans are also referred to in world as God engines. They function as essentially mobile Well, as you can see with the Imperator class, it's literally got a church in it. And it has literal armies inside. There are also a lot of really big ships in 40k. Though, I do wish they showed more stuff because they did not cover a lot. But yeah. There are... Well, I had intended to cover some orc stuff, but we ran out of time. Chaos Titans are basically Titans that have, well, you know, devoted themselves to chaos. Oh my. I don't know how big he is in comparison to the others, but he looks sort of stubby, or like he's trying to do T-Rex arms with his cannons. Only $105. What a bargain. Oh my god. Well, also you have to understand that some, like, I don't know if you saw the price, but some of these Titans are like well over $1,000. It's like, do I want to eat food and pay rent this month, or like this year, or do I want to buy my massive thing? Oh, and then of course, you know, there are the various, like, the Tyranid bioforms. But yeah, I'll try to cover more stuff. I actually need to go right on time. Also, before that, just to leave you off with a little neat thing. I mentioned there were several orc dreadnoughts. The Killicans are basically, the orcs have these little tiny members of their race, which are called like Gretchens. There's also a smaller kind called Snotlings. When a dreadnought for a Gretchen is this thing here, which it is stated after the Gretchen becomes interred in the dreadnought, it will literally, like, go after the orc that bullied it the most and kill them, because they're often bullied by others, like, haha, fuck you. But the thing is, they're still cowards. So if you have like a bunch of them, and then a big, like, guy gets taken down, they're like, ah, 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 and just start running away, because, you know, as I mentioned, they're a bunch of cowards. And of course, they're called Killicans. Yes. But yeah, and then of course there's a bunch of the silly weapons that they have. Like, let's see if I can find a few of them. There's Margaret Thatcher. Oh yeah, I guess I'll show you a picture of the Gretchen. And can I find the rocket troopers? Squigoth. I can't find the thing I wanted to show you, but yes, here are some of the air units that the orcs use. They appear to not have the guys with rockets strapped to their backs, because that's what they have. Rocket troopers are literally just guys with rockets attached to their backs, and then it's just how orcs do. And then these are the Gretchen. And there's this one here who's basically a Gretchen herder. You see, in orc society, the biggest person, oh yeah, indeed, the largest orc is the leader. So, you know, orcs don't really understand most human, like, leadership roles, because it's just like, you know, That makes no sense. Like, why is that little guy in charge of that bigger guy? However, you know, when it comes to the Emperor and the Primarchs, they're like, oh yeah, of course big Space Marine guy is the leader. And of course, you know, the Emperor is the biggest of them all. Like, an example of orc logic is the orcs love stealing stuff and taking it as a loot, or like love to get loot. So, for the Mechanicus planets, they're covered in metal and various machines and other stuff. So the orcs are like, those Yumis are stupid. I just can't understand it. They don't follow common sense. If they make their planet so flashy and full of loot everywhere, then why do they get angry when we try to take it? And I don't know, those Yumis, they just don't make any sense. But yeah, now I actually really have to go. I was just getting changed for work. See you later. Bye-bye.